Startups. Woo! Wow. Amazing. This is one of the busiest Fridays we've had in a while, actually. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Before I introduce you to this amazing panel, I just wanted to say a few words about UTS. I think many of you might not know that actually we just opened a brand new co-working space 2 floors above where we are right now. So we have 250 desks. We recently had 70 startups join in the last few weeks. So it's getting super busy. So if you're interested, please come check it out. We actually also put some tours up on Humanitics. So if you want to check out the space, please sign up for a tour. We run them on Wednesdays at 10 a.m., Fridays at 3 p.m., 3:30 p.m., just before this event. So please come and check it out. But without further ado, let's kick off this panel. So we have a really exciting topic today, a topic that everyone always asks me about. Jane, where can I find out about government funding? So I thought may as well put together a panel because I have these 3 amazing people that I just thought are the best people to talk about this topic. So I will let everyone introduce themselves, please. So I'll hand it over to Brian first.
Thank you, Jane. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Lim. I run PollenOne.com. It's the free search engine for you to find grants and tenders here in Australia. I have a background actually as a self-taught rocket scientist. I have stuff floating above our heads as we speak. And basically, I built my technical businesses on the back of government funding. So now I'm just saying, hey, I can help everybody else to get funding. Let's do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks, Jane and UTS Startups for having us. It's great to see so many people in the room this afternoon interested in this topic. So my name's Reid. I'm a partner at the Government Incentives team at EY. And my role is all about supporting early stage companies and founders and businesses to access non-dilutive funding and other incentives that can really accelerate your growth. So primarily work with the Australian R&D Tax Incentive, and other programs like the Early Stage Investor Incentives, Export Market Development Grant, just to name a few. So really passionate about supporting startups to really accelerate their growth.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Chak. I always have trouble introducing myself because for the last decade or so, people know me as the grant guy because I help a lot of founders access government funding by providing them with funding strategy, building the application, etc. But I have an entrepreneurial background where I started my first business as a teenager 25 years ago. And since I've built 5 businesses, I've gone through the full life cycle of raising capital, access government grant for my own businesses, and also selling businesses. And I've been mentoring the tech startup ecosystem for the last decade as well, and have probably met with over 1,000 founders, and in various different capacity, working on their go-to-market strategy, capital raising strategy. And I've also spent 6 years in both state and federal government as an advisor and also assessor of various different commercialization grants. Yeah, glad to be here to share some insights with you guys.
Wow. Definitely have a team of specialists here to talk about this topic. But let's kick off. Firstly, I want to ask a question for all of you. Why should startups consider government funding as part of their overall capital strategy? You have you can share that. Oh, careful.
This is on. Look, Jen, I think, probably the key reasons, non-dilutive funding, right? So you can access this funding via government incentives and you're not having to give away equity or shares. Obviously, cash at an early stage is really important. You can extend your runway. So, a lot of early stage companies, every dollar counts. So getting all those dollars in that can support your growth is really important. There's some really generous benefits that you can access through these programs. So for example, with the R&D tax incentive, if you're eligible, you can access a 43.5% tax offset, which can be a cash refund. So if you're spending, say, $100,000 on R&D, you can potentially get $43,500 back from the Australian government to support that innovation. And I think finally, just from a funding mix point of view, having that government incentives plus also private investment can really signal credibility and can really give some confidence to the investors that you're working with. Maybe Brian or Jonathan, you've got a point with this? Yeah.
I think, Cameron, you have covered, all these reasons. And personally, I think the more pertinent question for all of you is, why not? Right? It's not the simplest process, as with anything. Like, business in itself is already hard. Okay, it's hard. But if you decided to go into business, then why not take the opportunity to jump on any funding opportunity that is in front of you, right? Despite the fact that it's a very hard process. But and other nuance in government grant and also is I think it's which program, right? Which program is extremely important. Most program is not for everyone. They are driven, heavily by policy into particular areas, particular sectors, particular industries. So there's very rarely like agnostic or very generic government grant program out there. But and that's why Brian's solution would be a really good one for you. It's a free search engine where you can go in and look up how many opportunities.
We've got about 7 billion in open opportunities right now.
There you go. So
Australia, yes.
Just Australia, yeah. Well, that's my 2 cents for now. Brian.
For me, it's a little different exercise. So I use grants to figure out what the government actually wants. So yes, the government gives a lot of money, as they have said, for building businesses. But I look a lot for the grants specifically that don't care about business. The government is trying to solve problems which you cannot throw money at to solve, right? And they will effectively create these funding programs to try and make that happen. So, think about the Industrial Growth Program, which is manufacturing. You can't just throw money to create manufacturing. You need to incentivize, encourage, because they don't act directly, they have to act indirectly. They need to find people to execute on these things. So the way I built my really deep technical businesses is that I find the problems that the government can't solve, provide an option in that sense, and they actually direct me to the funding opportunities to solve it for them. That's the way I look at it. So what it means is, for example, if I say I get a really, really nice defense opportunity, it's not about the money, it's about national security. So I get to build a commercial business, but solve a problem that's worth more than the money they're giving me. And the government gives out a fair bit of money to solve those problems.
Thank you. That's a very interesting perspective I've never thought about. The next question is also for everyone. Maybe I will share the mic with Brian and you guys share, then it might be easier. What's the biggest misconception you see founders having about grants or incentives?
It's not about you. It's about what the government is trying to do. It's money to encourage you to take actions in certain areas. So if you want to build a startup that say, I want to do Facebook for cats and dogs, the government might give you some money if you can get commercial traction on it, but you can't go to the manufacturing guys and go, can you give me money for this? No, right? Because the government's initiative right now is to do manufacturing. So think of it as money the government wants to spend like a customer and treat it accordingly versus, hi, it's free money, can I have some? Please don't do that.
I think that's a good point, right? Around the government's really trying to back winners here. So they want to be able to stand up and say, hey, we've backed this company. I think they're a good investment. I think just building on what Brian was saying as well is that it's not a handout. It's not free money. There are certain obligations you need to meet, certain requirements you need to meet when you're accessing these programs. So it's really important to understand that, again, it's not a handout. There is effort and compliance and obligations that you meet, that you need to meet throughout that process as well.
Yeah, I agree with both Cameron and Brian's perspective. Like I've looked at over 1,000 grant applications throughout my tenure in various capacity in state and federal government. And the minute you read the application, you can tell. Like, and one of the things we jokingly, talk amongst ourselves is, grants are not centering for business. It's not like, oh, because you can't afford to build your business, but you have a good heart and you have an idea, and someone else is obliged to support you to, make that dream happen. Like, unfortunately, it's not really about that, and it really can shine through, through your writing, through the tone, and through the words that you're using. And I think, to Cameron's point, there are a lot of efforts that needs to be put in any application, and the assessor can really tell, like if this applicant is really understands the industry, the supply chain, the motivation and drivers of why the customers or the market actually wants to buy a particular solution, and that really shines through. And recently I was doing assessment on some research project, and again, like the commerciality of it often is missing, and I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions about grants, is that, okay, because I'm doing some great tech, or I'm doing a project that has social good, that because it's government funding, then they should be supporting these kind of things, right? But unfortunately, as Brian said, it's what the government wants. They're driving capital into different areas and sectors for particular outcomes, and we really have to spend the time to study the guidelines and the policies to really understand where the money should be going.
Well, that actually ties in really well into our next question, which is for you, Jonathan. So you can pick up the mic again. You reviewed hundreds or thousands of applications. What makes a funding proposal stand out instantly?
I think one area that is very often overlooked is your understanding about the supply chain and distribution. Very rarely applicants talk about that. They talk about their tech, they talk about their solution, their product, and how they're different. We are doing X, Y, Z together, and in the world, there's no one ever has put those three things together as a one solution. But that's fine, great. It's a differentiation, but so what? How are you going to sell it? Who wants it? And distribution is the other thing that most people don't really talk about. And I think those applications that really stand out, they talk about supply chain. They understand the downstream, particularly if they are not selling directly to the customer. Who's just downstream, and why? Why does it matter for them? What's in it for them, right? You're selling it to your downstream, and then potentially the downstream is going to sell it to the end market, right? What's in it for the people involved? How much money are they going to make? Is it going to give them a particular competitive advantage with adopting your solution or integrating your solution into their offering? Then all of these nuances in business, I call it business 101. Unfortunately, a lot of people when they work on government grants, having seen over 1,000 applications, I can very confidently say most people don't talk about those things. They talk about, we are helping, hire a lot of people. We are helping with unemployment. We are helping with wellness issue, mental health issues, very broadly. But show me the money. Like, where is the money? As if you would actually talk to an investor, or you are actually talking to private funds or whatnot. Yeah, that would be one of the things that stood out to me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Next question is for Cameron. Many founders are confused about what qualifies as R&D under the R&D tax incentive. Can you give a few examples of what typically does and doesn't count?
Yeah, sure. Maybe before I answer that, has anyone in the room accessed the R&D tax incentive or had experience, a couple? How did you find the process of distinguishing what's R&D and what's not? Challenging? Easy? Perfect. And look, that's why I have a job. And look, it is challenging. It's, when we're looking at the R&D tax incentive, the core piece around that program is understanding what is eligible R&D and what's not. And it can be quite subjective. We are talking about tax law here, and there's certain definition that we need to construct or describe and fit our activities within. But within the R&D tax incentive, we look at R&D activity. There's two types of R&D activity that we can claim. There's core R&D activity, supporting R&D activity. You need to identify at least one of these core R&D activities occurring at some point in time in order to submit a claim. Now, the core R&D activities are broadly what we call experimental activities that have an unknown outcome and aim to generate new knowledge. So they typically follow a systematic progression of work. We have a hypothesis, we have experiments, we observe, evaluate, and draw logical conclusions. So it's a very scientific method construct and tests that we need to apply when we're looking at this program. Now, there are certain exclusions that are applied. There's other nuances within the law that you need to navigate as well when you're looking at these activities. It is a broad-based program, so it can apply across many industries. So we're talking around what can and can't, fit within that definition. It is quite complex. But if we're talking about what might be a core R&D activity, and thinking about different industries or sectors here, you might be developing a new algorithm or technology that has an unknown outcome. You might be developing a prototype using new materials or processes that, again, is requiring some element of experimentation. You really need to be able to identify, that there is a hypothesis there that you need to do an experiment to be able to resolve, and you need to be able to prove that the outcome of that hypothesis is unknown. Generally, things that aren't going to qualify for a core R&D activity are things that are going to be on the exclusions list, and that talks around, market research, customer surveys, activities that comply or related to associated with complying with regulatory requirements. There's certain other exclusions around software for internal purposes. But anything that's not fitting within that definition of experimentation or hypothesis-driven experimentation, where there's that technical uncertainty, is unlikely to be able to fit within the core. Now, you can, I mentioned there was 2 types of activities. You may be able to look at some of those activities as that second class, as a supporting R&D activity, but there's certain other tests that need to apply. So as this gentleman pointed out, it can be complex, and it's really important that you get the right advice around what constitutes R&D and what doesn't, just to make sure you don't have any headaches down the track if you do get reviewed or examined.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cameron. Next one for Brian. You've raised funding globally. How does Australia's government funding ecosystem compare internationally?
So I'll break the answer up into 3 parts. So the first part is like my program design. So by program design, we're actually quite good. The programs are clear-cut, they're very well written, and they are quite clear about what they are asking from you. Now, the challenge that we have, which is the second part, is our risk profile culturally is quite poor. So I would say that most of the funding sources that I've seen in Australia, they give the funds out to the people who don't get them fired. So if you have a program that says, I'm really innovative, I'm going to change the world, nobody's going to care if I'm going to get fired next. So let me give you an example. If I wind back the clock to 2007, that's the year before Bitcoin, by the way, and I say I want to do a crypto startup, would you fund that opportunity? It's very innovative, very great, but it's too risky. So being too innovative actually shoots you down here. But you know what happens in the US? There were people who put funding out in the US, so that's a risk profile management. They can see the potential and they have capacity to do so. The third area that I would bring up here about how we are structured is we're very good specifically in different verticals. So I'll refer to something called the Rural Development Corporations. So Meat and Livestock Australia, the Grain Corporation, the cotton industry, all have these rural development corporations. So they have a levy that's partially funded by the industry, and the government provides matching funds there. And that organization's job is to develop and grow the industry forward. Those programs are very mature, very well done, very well structured, and very focused. So if you can sort a problem out in that industry, they pay a lot of attention, and effectively speaking to the people in those organizations is as good as speaking to a customer because of how close they are to the customer need. So if you pick a vertical that we're good at in Australia, you're okay. Pick a vertical that we're not good at, that's going to be rough.
Great, thank you, Brian. Jonathan, timing seems critical in applications. When is the right time to apply for a grant, and when is it too early?
That's a tricky one because every program, runs on their own agenda, and your business runs on your agenda. And a lot of the times, it doesn't fit. I'll give you an example. New South Wales MVP Ventures, the first round just closed. The next round is coming up, and then there is another round in March. So as a business, you would have to ask yourself, hey, should I go in, the first round, or the second round in November or March? And it really depends. And then there is the complexity of, when are they going to announce the funding, or even tell you that you're not successful? And that has always been the consensus around a lot of programs. Maybe not R&D Tax Incentive, yeah, but for a lot of competitive grants, usually that's the case. There are just too many different factors that we're not going to go into today that affects the announcement or the assessment process or the time it takes to arrive at a conclusion. So my best advice is do it whenever you can and forget about it. Don't rely on it. So the timing of government grants, you can't rely on it as a lifeline. Run your business as is, but if your business aligns with particular policies and programs, jump on it straight away. Take the opportunity, and do it, leave it. And when the good news comes, great, you're extending your runway, you get extra money. But if it doesn't, it does not stuff up your business plan, your financial planning, or whatever it is. Unfortunately, that's the case. We all wish that it would be a little bit different, but that's in reality that's the experience I've got so far.
Do they tell you though when you should hear back from them? Because I've had quite a few startups
They
asking
always
me.
do.
Jane, they do?
They always do.
Okay, good.
They have a rough. A lot of programs do have a rough
MVP,
timeline.
I'm asking about specifically. There's a few startups that are like, when will I hear back? When they're seem pretty dependent on it. But
Unfortunately,
yeah.
the word around is they've obviously, like with any competitive program, there's an overwhelming submission, and there's only so much resources to go through them. When you think about it, like back in the days when in 2018, I was one of the assessors for another iteration of the MVP grant back then. And each application needs to be assessed by 3 assessors. So it does take time. And imagine if you have to go through 300 applications, that's 900 reads. Right? Back in the days, we have 7 of us. If you do the math, like, if you work, nonstop for 8 hours, how many applications can you actually go through? So unfortunately, there's no favorable answer here in terms of timeline, but my advice will always be focus on your own business. That's the most important thing to you. Leverage government grants when you can, but don't rely on it.
Great, thank you. This one's for Cameron. Beyond the R&D tax incentive, what are some other programs that startups should be aware of?
Good question. Well, obviously, there's a whole range of programs that the government provides that can support early stage companies. Jonathan has just mentioned one, the MVP grant or MVP Ventures program, which is offered by the New South Wales government. There's other programs, the R&D Tax Incentive, which we've mentioned. There's the Industry Growth Program, which I can see a few heads nodding here, which Brian briefly mentioned earlier, which is all about supporting innovative SMEs to commercialize and grow their businesses. There is some certain process for that grant where you need to get some advice. You get the advisory services, and then you can be invited to apply for the grant funding. There's other grants that can support you to promote and market your product or service overseas. That's called the Export Market Development Grant, offered by Austrade. So if you're looking to attend trade shows, seminars, do some international marketing, or have an overseas representative in a jurisdiction you're looking to expand into, you could potentially get funding to support some of those activities. From another tax incentive lens as well, there's another program that often when I'm talking to early stage companies, they're not aware of, but it's called the Early Stage Investor Incentives. And this is really an incentive for investors to invest in early stage innovation companies, or ESICs. And there's certain requirements you need to meet there, both from the company side and the investor side, but essentially the investors can get a tax offset or CGT exemption on disposal of shares, which can, again, it's an investor incentive, but can make your company more attractive to investment. So there's a whole range of different programs that come up at any one time. As Brian said, was it $7 billion worth of funding opportunities available at any one time. So that roadmap can change, new programs can come up to meet certain government priority areas. So it's really important, and I'm probably bringing the conversation together here. What Jonathan was saying is around making sure you understand what's available, looking at your life cycle, looking at your roadmap, and thinking about where those programs might fit within that life cycle, but also having your finger on the pulse when new things that come up, and making sure that you have a subscription or alerts from PollenOne to get those into your inbox every week, so you can have a quick scan and say, is there something here that could potentially apply to what we're doing in our projects?
And once you have identified the grants, get us to work on it for you.
Great, thank you. Next one's for Brian. Founders often have long R&D cycles before seeing revenue. What's your advice for staying fundable during that period?
That's a really good question. So this is my experience, so just to get understand where it comes from. If you're in the space industry, we expect 90% of the venture capital money raised to be spent within the first 7 years before you see any profit. So that's a very expensive hurdle across, right? So you break it down a couple of ways. So A, yes, you can raise venture capital money. The government is also looking to subsidize the creation of new industries and opportunities. That's one way of looking at it. Also look at, from a customer standpoint, tangential industries. For example, I spoke to a company that was really, really good at building drones. And this is like 10 years ago. So, and they were doing really good drones for like, they want to do it for package delivery. And they were struggling to get funding in the US environment, actually. So and they were in San Francisco at the time, and I was talking to them, and it says, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to Reno, Nevada. All right? And they was like, why there? Why this tiny town? I couldn't tell them why at the time, but they went. And this is what I can now tell you. Reno, Nevada, as you now know, is the site of the Tesla Gigafactory. So I already had inside knowledge that they were going there. So they would already have a battery supply chain that would be of benefit. Second, Reno, Nevada had already assigned 3 locations to do drone testing, so they could get easy, low-cost testing. So and they could tie with a tier 1 university, so all their cost drops. And because they were there, the entire investor network and all the local tenders and grants were prioritized for them. So they started generating revenue in Reno, Nevada, before they actually finished their funding round in the US. So by looking at different places where nobody was looking, they could find that. So our version here in Australia is you look for the segments where there is resourcing but underserved. And I think the best way you want to think about it is don't treat grants and tenders, again, like a handout. You treat it like a customer sales funnel. You're not going to get every sale. If you can find a sales rep that can close 30% of your sales, you have met someone incredible. Do not lose them. So you want to treat the same thing from a grants and tenders perspective. It's like it's a sales funnel. Treat it as such. You're going to make the bids. You're not going to win every one, but treat it through that process. And then, you'll start, once you know your odds of winning are like 10% or 20%, you can build a sales pipeline around it and actually get steady income. That's the way I would do it. And that's the way I got through my time as well.
Great, thank you, Brian. Next one's for Jonathan. As someone who's also been a founder, how do you balance grant strategy with raising private capital?
It complements it. It extends your runway. That's probably the best way to look at it. Again, reiterating, government grants are not there for relying on as a lifeline. So if you can raise capital, raise capital. Investor will love you if you can also get government grants. So, if you raise $1 million and then subsequently you can extend your runway by accessing certain government grant with another $500,000, hey, great. So you have got more time and got more resources to hit your milestones. Yeah, but other than that, I haven't had much more to add to that point.
No worries. And here's a question for everyone or anyone who wants to answer. How important is storytelling, how you communicate your mission in winning funding?
I think, Jonathan can maybe talk to this a little bit more, but I think from a competitive grants point of view, storytelling's important. Being able to tell, what your project is, how it aligns with the program objectives, what's the real world impact that you're having through that program. So I think a lot of that storytelling is really powerful, and maybe Jonathan can add to that in a moment. For the R&D tax incentive, storytelling is probably less important. You want to be more factual, and you're developing a legal position around the eligibility of your activities. So it's probably more about being factual. What have I done? Why is it eligible? And making sure that you have the substantiation to back up your claims.
No, totally. I agree with Cameron. With competitive grants, storytelling probably plays a slightly bigger role than in R&D, but still, you are actually signing a stat DAC that all the information that you're providing in an grant application should be true, and it's about articulation. I've seen a lot of applications where they have probably done something that they didn't tell us, especially around your discussion around with your potential customers, your discussion with your downstream. Name them. Who are they, right? Why be so secretive about, we have, 2 big distributor that can, get us to XYZ market? Like, why be secretive about it? There's no harm naming things. Like, if you're selling, a piece of hardware and Bunnings is your distributor and they've already put their hand up and say, hey, I want to distribute your product. Hey, boost about it. That's fine. Totally fine to boost about it and tell the world about it. It's great. Using your customers as a validation, it's very, very important. Whatever you say, seriously, I don't really care. But let's say I always use this example. If you're in mining tech, let's say for example, you've got a piece of mining tech, and you've been working with BHP for a few months or half a year or so, and they're putting engineers to really rip your solution apart to see if it works for them, et cetera, and they're on board. And whatever they say carries so much more weight than what you're going to say. And this is literally how I look at commercialization grants. Particularly, sometimes I can just read the letters of intent, and then you're 80% there. It doesn't really matter, because we can't be expert of everything. But if one of the industry leaders says something about your solution, then it must be true, right? It's just common sense. And so the due diligence logic, it's somehow like that. So if you've got some go nuggets that about your market, your supply chain, your distribution strategy, your distributors, use them to your advantage.
I really like where this is going. Like, I do R&D a lot, so my documentation is so dry that does it look like an oasis or a necessity. But when it comes to storytelling for me, what I will say is, I've learned, the assessor doesn't know your work. And I won't mention it, but I found out recently that one of the people assessing my R&D claim behind the scenes in the government, her prior job was paper mache. And I was like, I'm trying to send something into space, and it's really technical, right? And the person assessing me does paper cutouts. I'm like, blink, blink. And so when I realized that, I learned, if I have to tell a story, I'm not telling a story. There are 2 stories to tell. So I have a legal requirement, that's R&D, that's fine, but I'm telling the story not for an expert in the room, but for someone who's not an expert to understand what's going on. So his point about, looking for a marker of whether the big primes or a leader in the field is saying we should pay attention is actually really important. But more importantly, in your storytelling, the context of why it's important. Because they don't understand. If I can tell you that I can have water in a cup, that's water, that's easy. But if you're telling me that this water in a cup is because the the reservoirs are dry and I can make water out of thin air, that's a very different conversation because of context. So pay attention to your storytelling from that perspective.
Agreed. Thank you so much. Next one's for Cameron. What's the best way for startups to prepare their documentation or systems before claiming the R&D tax incentive?
Yeah, good question. And Brian's just told us about his struggles in that space. So look, I suppose with the R&D tax incentive, like any tax program, record keeping is key. So you really need to make sure you've got the proper evidence in place to support the claims that you're making, particularly around the R&D activities, but also on the expenditure side that you're claiming as well. So often when I'm coming into early stage companies, they're focused on their business, building a product, getting it to market, and a lot of that governance piece and record keeping often falls away. So if you're going to access the R&D tax incentive program, make sure you have proper records in place to demonstrate your claims. Now, what we typically do with these clients and the recommendations we provide is make sure you don't leave it to last minute. If you're doing R&D, start now, get the records in place that are going to support the activities. Write down your hypothesis, write down the experiments, record your results, record all those inquiries you've made to confirm that there is that uncertainty there and the need to undertake an experiment. So get that started today. Don't wait until tax time or year end. Second piece is don't create a whole new process for this R&D tax incentive piece if you can. If you can fit it into your existing workflows and uplift them for those projects that are going to be R&D eligible, is probably the easiest pathway. So if you're doing software R&D and using Jira or Confluence or GitHub, putting some frameworks within those existing processes to capture those additional data points that we need for R&D tax purposes is probably the easiest way. And then probably the final piece that we generally do is around education, right? So when you're working with your teams, make sure the people that are actually preparing those records understand what the R&D tax incentive is and why it's important to the business and what the ask is there from a record keeping point of view. I think if you get all of those 3 points working and the people understand why this process is important and what the implications are if you don't have those proper records in place, then you're in a better position if you do get reviewed.
Awesome. Thank you, Cameron. Brian, what's something founders often underestimate about the follow-through actually delivering on milestones after winning a grant?
How much paperwork you need to do, right? You think writing the grant is hard? Wait till you see the paperwork for some of these guys. Like for the smaller programs like the MVP, and in fact, even the Industrial Growth Program, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's relatively light. There are some programs out there where you have to submit a phone book of paperwork every quarter. I'll give you an example. When the space agency started its first round of funding for opportunities, the follow-up document for the second stage of the funding process, because it was a 2-stage funding process, my friend's company literally had this much paperwork, actual, of A4 sheets that he had to submit. That was also a problem with the fund design as far as I'm concerned, because if you submit this much and you say, and they had they had about 600 applicants, so let's say 600 applicants at 1,000 pages per application, they said it would be done in 3 months. 24 months later, they still hadn't finished. So they don't like paperwork as much as you do, trust me. But they have to put the paperwork out. So when you do get some of the larger funds, you really want to dedicate time or have somebody really focusing on making sure the paperwork is done right. It's not just the sheer size of it, but it's also, for example, like they will come back to you and ask, I want the pay slips of all your employees you're claiming against, because I want to verify that. So is someone out there making sure the pay slips are organized every month so that when it comes to submission, it's good? So there's a lot of more work and due diligence. But honestly, if you're doing that at the grant level, by the time you get to R&D, a lot of the paperwork is done already. So it's sort of, you win that way as well.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, one for you. What are the most common mistakes or red flags you've seen that instantly hurt an application's chances?
To Brian's point, the application does not provide any context. A lot of applicants tends to focus on their own invention, particularly in commercialization grants, because it's all about inventions, right? But that's a really big red flag. Like, you're not even telling me what the business opportunity is, the downstream, the upstream, what the market is. And another red flag is the size of the opportunity when you're working on that. And I get a lot of applications where they just go on Google or some industry report and give me, hey, this is a $50 billion industry. But so what? Like, give me some context. Like, can you explain, who the actual end paying customer is going to be, and why do they need the problem? Do they even know why they actually want the problem solved? How much is that problem to them? And with all these analyses, I expand a little bit more, but not just on a high level. So that's a really, really big red flag. And the other one I mentioned already, if you have engagement with your potential customers, name them, or even get them involved early to have them show you some support, like perhaps in a letter of intent. And speaking of letter of intent, that's another red flag with submitting letters of intent is a very generic letter saying that, hey, we are XYZ company and we fully support this company's grant application, blah, 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 full stop. Like, that doesn't give me any context of why they're supporting you at all. You could have worked with your partners or potential customers. You write the draft for them. You drive the narrative yourself and say, "Hey, we've been working with this company on their innovation, and we really like it. Although it has not met our standards yet, and these are the kind of work that they need to do in the next 12 months for us to really assess the commercial viability of integrating it into our business workflows." And if they can do that, it will, save us 30% of our off-packs and potentially increasing, our revenue or top line by 20%. Like, if you can do that, and those are not promises at all, right? It's just speculations, but at least it paints a picture for the audience or the assessor to really understand what the business opportunity is. The last one, a red flag is ego. You can really tell it, you can smell it, but just by reading an application, especially with commercialization, because it comes from, a lot of the applications comes from heavy research, and because someone might have spent a decade or 2 decades on that particular topic. It's their baby, and I'm not surprised that they're really proud of it, and that's okay, no problem at all. But don't just focus on the technicality of what you have achieved, but put it around a context, like at the end of the day, I'm a businessman, so show me the money, please.
Great. We have a couple more questions before we dive into audience questions. So this is for everyone, actually, or whoever wants to respond. For a startup just beginning to explore this space, what's the first step they should take next week to get funding ready?
Use my website. No, like, if you're going to do any project, you want to know ultimately what is the customer going to pay for. So the point of my website is you can search and see what the government wants to spend money on, and therefore you have a sense of where your priorities are before you start spending money, right? And also, I haven't indexed yet, but also look at international funding. First and foremost, you actually can apply for it. Some countries, I have actually applied to the UK Defence for funding opportunities in the past, and I have looked at overseas funding as an Australian entity. There is funding overseas for Australian entities that you can go for, both in grants and tenders as opportunities. That's one. Two, it's a different ballgame if you tell the tender guy, when you're applying a grant, that we know that America is spending $50 billion to make this a real opportunity. I would like to chase this opportunity here. It's a very different conversation of saying, I think there's an opportunity, or here's the business report, because somebody has made the commitment. So I found that it gets me through a lot of additional conversations by being able to talk about what other government funding priorities are, and the question then is is Australia interested in chasing this as an opportunity as well?
This one. Yeah, good answer. Look, I think if I was a startup next week thinking about government funding, you want to plan ahead, right? You want to do a health check essentially on your funding roadmap. So a lot of the grants that we're talking about here are often prospective, so they're not things that have happened. You're kind of looking at something that you will do. The R&D tax incentive is a year-on-year process, but typically you're looking forward, right? So you want to be sitting down, thinking about your roadmap, thinking about your life cycle, thinking about the timing there and the activities and projects that you're going to be working on, and start putting in where these kind of mainstay programs might fit within that life cycle. So if you're doing R&D, you're building a new product, think about the R&D tax incentive. If you're looking to raise capital from third parties, start thinking about the early stage investor incentives or the ESIC program that I talked about earlier. Once you get to that point where you're looking to expand overseas and start promoting and marketing your product, that's a trigger to start thinking about the EMDG. So just be strategic around it and start thinking and planning ahead and have a strategy around that government funding roadmap that you might apply going forward.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is to really understand your industry and use PollenOne to search for all of the relevant programs to your industry that you're operating in, right? And then, as Cameron said, now, because you have visibility of what's available, because you can't do anything until you have that visibility, right? Now you can plan your roadmap, right? And even with a lot of government programs, they have probably designed themselves as one after another. Like, say for example, the industry growth program. It's for it's starting from, if we're talking about technology readiness level, it's about 3 or 4, around, not maybe a little bit more than that, but round about that to take your solution to a pilot stage or whatever. And then, there are public funding into certain VC funds, as an example, main sequence to take on some of the projects that have, graduated out of the industry growth program. And then, once VC funding is in there, private capital activator, then the National Reconstruction Fund kicks in, into like kind of more like a PE fund kind of scenario. So there are a lot of thinking and decisions around policy making and how the government actually create these programs. So it's worthwhile to put some time to study it. But if you don't want to spend the time, come to us experts. We've already done the work. we can kind of give you a little bit of guidance on where you might be able to fit in with all the grant space. And unfortunately, like from a practical sense, most business are not investable, or from a private capital perspective, and also from a grant funding perspective. And if you are operating in a business where those two types of fundings are not very likely, then the logical step to take is not waste time in it. Not doing something can sometimes play to your advantage as well.
Thank you. Do you refuse a lot of startups, by the way, that come to you for grant help?
Most of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wish I don't have to do that. Like,
Yeah.
I would love everyone who comes to me become
Yeah.
my clients and pay me for my consulting. I would love that. But I tend to be honest, and I can tell, like, within 15 minutes of our conversation, I know kind of which grant you can or cannot get already, and whether you're likely to be successful. And yeah, unfortunately, it's not that I'm choosy. It's the government, right? As Brian said, like it's about them. It's not about you. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. One last question for everyone before I'll hand it over to the audience for some questions. I had a few extra questions here, but we kind of answered them. So I have some backup ones if no one has questions, but I'm sure there will be lots. But what is the one government program you think more founders should know about in 2026?
Look, I think I'd go back to the early stage investor incentives. It's one that often people aren't aware of, and it can make your company more attractive to investment. There is an ATO decision tool as well. So if you look up the ATO ESIC decision tool, it can help you, assess whether you meet that status at the relevant point in time.
I can list long list. So I will just say, Me Livestock Australia, any rural development corporation has funding every year, and they're always looking for opportunities. Of course, usual is the Industrial Growth Program, Export Marketing Development Grant, as well are important. If you're in the Medical Research Fund is a $24 billion fund to help you do with medical-related products. I haven't put it on my system, but there's a $10 billion program out there for housing right now to help build houses. So if you're into the accommodation space, pay attention to that one as well. I just don't have the name off the top of my head. So I would say these are the funds you want to be spending some time looking at. And the more vertically aligned you are, the better.
But considering we are at a university context at UTS Startups, I think there is a program called Australia Economic Accelerator, AEA. Specifically, it's administered by the Department of Education. It's specifically for university to commercialize their IP. So if you are working within the university as a researcher, PhD, academia, and you have pieces of technologies which has a market potential, I think there's more than $1 billion worth of funding in that particular program, which I always look at policies and look at where money is flowing. If that's the case, it means in the next 5-10 years, that's probably where a lot of focus would be drawn to. As a business, the opportunity is to look at your business, your sector, your industry, and see what urgent problems you need to solve. And perhaps there are opportunities to partner with these academics or researcher in drawing out particular IP or technology or solutions that you wouldn't be able to access before with the AEA funding. I think there's a lot of scope in there for business to explore towards the university direction.
Great, thank you. I'm going to throw it to the audience for a couple of questions. Once that's done, we will have some time for networking, so you can. I think all of us are sticking around for a bit, so you can ask some direct questions. But I will get up, and who has the first question? I think Tim had it up first. I'll come to you next. Okay, 1 second.
First of all, thanks very much. It's been really insightful. I guess my question is in relation to AI specifically. That's moving so quickly. Where's the government's head on AI? Are they in tune with that growth? Or do they just have very wide categories like the NRD, I can't remember, those types of things? Just really interested in the really fast moving sectors and specifically AI because I'm being a selfish bastard.
So whenever I speak to people about AI, it's always in the market vertical specific context. There's no generic AI fund unless it's like a university research thing. But if you're helping robotics AI with housing, there's a person there who is the subject matter expert who will think about AI for that. And so from that perspective, Australia is actually quite on the ball trying to figure out how to make AI work. The challenge is, if all you have is a hammer, all you see are nails, right? So what we find is there's a lot of AI companies who write in AI, and then they have a solution looking for a problem, not a problem looking for a solution. So if you're looking at if you can solve their problem, so problem looking for a solution, and it's AI, they are very interested. But they're not going to come the other way around.
Look, there's already programs that can support AI development. The R&D Tax Incentive being one. There's other grants in certain verticals that can support that piece. I think it's going to accelerate. And I think there's going to be more government focus on AI moving forward. You've already seen in Europe, there's multi-billion dollar euro funds that are being set up purely to support AI advancement and development. So I think that's just a sign of what potentially could come to Australia and the region to further advance that tech.
Yeah, I don't think we can represent what the government is actually doing from a policy point of view. We can only share what we've observed and seen in the market. And to Brian's point, I think there are grant programs where they've started to include AI as some of the focus areas. But more from an application point of view, like AI in robotics or AI in agriculture, is as the applied AI, rather than I've yet to see particular policies or funding programs specifically that is channeled towards creation of fundamental AI models. Like I don't think we have any of that capabilities in our country yet, and that's a big question mark for everyone. And I think a lot of debates is out there. Should we have our sovereign, even just an Australian LLM? Like that's up for debate. But I haven't seen much directives going into say, hey, we want to create this, and here's $10 billion. Please, someone do something. We haven't seen that yet.
People are actually doing that, but anyway, that's another topic. But I want to ask, what are the general conditions on the grants? I mean, I suppose there's different types of grants, but I mean, you can't spend money on this or that or whatever. And also, how many companies? Well, most companies are probably they've got some runs on the board, they've got some funding coming in before they go to a grant. In terms of the success, is that, or will they just go to the grant first and then that's a success story, or they actually have already got money coming in to get the grant?
Okay, expenditure. If we talk about grant programs specifically, most grant programs would have specified what are eligible expenditures, what are not eligible expenditures. And generally, especially the grants that I work with the most are very project-based. So general business as usual expenditure are not included, like rent of your office, or just buying a laptop for your staff, or general marketing cost wouldn't be eligible in a lot of the commercialization grants. But if it's materials or equipment that you need to purchase to build a pilot plan, or integration with your downstream partner to do some testing, then those would be eligible expenditure. What was the second part of the question, sorry? That's right. Depends on the program. Some programs are specifically designed for existing businesses. Like, I'll give you an example. Hard to recycle metals or hard to recycle plastic. You wouldn't expect anyone who has not been in recycling to apply for that grant, because it's a subsidy where, okay, if you can handle or get rid of per ton basis of hard to recycle plastic, we will subsidize X dollars, X cents on the dollar per ton that you can do. So for those grants, of course, you're an established company already, you would have funding. But things like, on the other end of the spectrum, like the MVP Ventures program, which is designed for very early stage innovation, then there's no expectation that you would have already got funding. It could be, it could end up like all of the recipients have never got any external investment at all. So it varies.
Okay, so as a follow-up on that question, so just more on, from the government's perspective, how do they risk manage? How do they claw back the grant if the startup fails, or do they disperse the funds in tranches? You mentioned a lot of paperwork. Is that a requirement for them to continue in dispersing the funds over time? And also, are there like co-investment requirements from founders, for example?
I'll start with my observation. Again, per program is different. Give you some examples. Again, let's use MVP Ventures. Their disbursements is broken up into 3 stages. So once you, if you are awarded the grant, as you sign the funding agreement, you get, I think it was a percentage of it, 20% or whatever it is of the grant amount. Then you start working on your project, and then they have 2 progress report, in which, for every report, you have to provide evidence of progress. So show me some of the work that you've done, and most importantly, it's acquittals. How much money have you spent? Show me your invoices and show me your, your payment receipts. Show me your pay slips to signify that you have paid your workers, et cetera, et cetera. So there are measures in place, but every program will be different. I have seen programs previously where there's a callback when things didn't go as expected. But those are rare. Those are rare. Yeah, most of them are in trenches. So if you don't meet certain milestones, or your business collapse or close down before you reach the end of the project, then obviously they just don't pay you the rest of it.
Maybe just on your last point there, a lot of the programs as well are match funding. So typically you'll have some skin in the game, and then the government will also back up a percentage of that project in the funding. So you need to, and typically you need to make sure you have those funds in bank or access to them before you apply. As part of your application process to show that you can contribute to the project under the grant guidelines.
To more expand is that grants are exactly as they describe, but government does, if you do a tender, it's slightly different. But also there's a category of low interest loans, not very rarely used in Australia, more common overseas, where you are given like a very low interest loan to execute on a project. The government will give you that, but the loans are structured with a very high level of forgiveness if you can't pay. So if you say, I'm building this business, they know it's a gamble, but they'll give you the high interest as a low interest loan. And if you fail and the company has to shut down, they don't come after you, because sometimes in these agreements, it will cross the directorship threshold and you're personally liable. But in these cases, what the government is actually doing is that it's a low interest loan, they get the money back, and they then take it to invest in the next company, right? And so that's one strategy the government uses to create a pool of money to fund investment and innovation in an area. So I've seen this happen in Australia a few times. It's not very common, but it does happen. And that's not a grant conversation. That's like a low interest loan conversation, right? So that's technically outside grants. But be aware that those things exist as well, okay? And yes, death to my paperwork.
Great. We just have one last question here before we get into networking, and then you can directly ask all the panelists some questions. Here's Sam.
It's going to be a 2-part. So if the first part, my assumption is if you can validate, then it's a very short one. Otherwise, it's a long one. So, most funding, especially in the private, is all ROI driven. Is the assumption correct that government is not looking at an ROI, like, 10x, 30x kind of a thing? So if that is correct, then what does the government really look at when they're assessing? Is it more societal, more, environment related, education, employment? Are those the criteria? Because if as a founder, if I'm trying to get funding both from the private, like a VC or a private equity, as well as, the government, then will my pitch be completely different?
I'll have the same answer. It depends on the program. Okay, but it does. I'll use the recycling example again. The ROI is very clear. Divert X number of tons of hard to recycle plastic away from landfill. Very clear. Okay. In commercialization scenarios, especially like new inventions, commercialization process, the ROI is a long game. Obviously, it's kind of playing in the VC role, very similarly, so to speak. And from a government perspective, the metrics that we can look at are long-term employment addition and the quality of the employment. Are we creating new jobs of XYZ post or whatever it is, right? And export revenue. export revenue is a very big key metric. But yeah, it really depends. Some programs are not particularly for business objectives. There might be other objectives like affordable housing. If then the metric would be the number of houses actually being built at a certain price. So you have to really chew up the guidelines and read between the lines to see what the program is actually looking for.
Again, to echo it is all program dependent. But let's change up a little. So there's always a business case. So like long-term employment, if the grant is $1 million and say it's all for salaries, the government will take 30-40% back by taxation already. So the question then being is, let's say it's $1 million grant, it's a $300,000 taxation position in terms of salary. Are you going to operate long enough after the grant is over to get for them to have an ROI? If you can, hey, that's a tick in the box for the financials. For foreign investment and export opportunities, very big deal. But then these are the general tick boxes. So if you're going for, say, a defense opportunity, and you're building something only defense wants, then defense has to ask the question, am I willing to pay all that money to maintain a capability that you are not allowed to sell to anyone else? Right? So to them, it's not a commercial decision if they need a capability. It's a national security question. Now, right, as there's a saying, it's like we're 3 days away from Armageddon. I was like 3 square meals away, which means like if we run out of food. So if there was a food emergency and you have an answer to solve it, trust me, it's not a dollar value question anymore. It's like, are my guys hungry? So the programs will tell you really where they're focusing their attention on. Focus on that and find programs that align to what you want to do. Don't try to shoehorn what you're doing into one of those programs. You're 80-90% likely not going to get it, right?
Totally agree. And look, I think just your point around investors versus the government funding, they're two completely different audiences, right? So the investors are looking for ROI, looking for that strategic alignment potentially. With the government grants, you're really trying to fit within the government priority areas, within the guidelines of the program. So you really need to tailor your message to fit with the audience that you're going for.
Yep.
One pragmatic way to look at it is, okay, pretend you are the minister that, this particular grant program is part of your portfolio. The way you would look at it is what goes on the headline in the newspaper, okay? That's how you look at an application. How likely is this application going to yield positive results so I can boast about it on the first page of Telegraph, okay? And on the other hand, how risky it is. If it goes south, how bad it is. Imagine the worst situation that this company, if it goes south, what would appear on the first page of Sydney Morning Herald? That's one way to look at it, hypothetically. But it helps you, frame your storytelling and also look at your risk analysis, very, very critically.
Thank you. Great ending. Well, let's give it a round of applause for the panelists. And as you probably can see, you can connect with them. I think there's a PollenOne. I think this leads to PollenOne. So please do check out Brian's grant finding website. And I think Jonathan's is leading to your is that like a little catch up?
Yeah, it's a calendar
awesome.
where you can just book in the time to have a chat, to learn a little bit more about your business that you're doing, and see if we can help you in any way.
Awesome. And then I think Cameron's leads to his LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's right. But if you want to have a chat, I'll stay around for half an hour.
So everyone's
and happy
sticking
to talk through any kind of questions you might have.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, another round of applause. We do have some snacks and some soft drinks there at the back, so please stick around, come and ask some questions. I just wanted to also say we are running these events every Friday. Next week, we actually have our confessions. It used to actually be confessions every week. With one of our members, Sam, actually, that asked the last question. The topic is from exit to impact, so it should be a really interesting conversation. So if any of you are free, please feel free to join us at the same time next week. But hopefully see you at either one of the tours of our upstairs co-working space or next Friday. And yeah, stick around for networking. Thank you.